Okay, hopefully it works. So hello everybody. Here I have the second recording for this semester. So unfortunately we had some holidays and we a little bit run short of time. So we will cover this topic in the recorded version. So far we were actually talking about diversity in terms of number of species, right? So we were interested in number of arthropod species worldwide, how to figure out the number of butterfly species in our campus. We were talking something about how number of species differs between tropics and outside of tropics and what can be the possible reasons. And we were also exploring something about how quickly the species accumulated over the time. So always it was about number of species. But actually diversity, naturally, you can feel it's not only that, right? It's also many other things. And one of the things which is actually very apparent about arthropods is their morphological diversity. So the diversity of forms, of shapes, of colors, of all these things which makes actually these animals so kind of attractive for everybody of us. I guess that if you like some of the arthropod groups, probably it's not because they have too many species, right? It's more like complication for the study, but you probably like them because they are so diverse in shapes and biologies and other things. So this is what we will cover today. So you probably know that for insects, right? So the left picture is the one of the beetle poster, which you can find somewhere online. And but the same is true also for many other arthropods. So on the right, you can see the diversity of some groups of crustaceans. So they're also super cool with very many color, forms, and shapes, and so on. So today's question is whether it is actually possible to summarize the reasons for this huge diversity of shapes, forms, and colors and these things. And if we will figure out whether we can somehow find the reasons for it, then can we actually connect this thing to what we were talking before? So can we connect the diversity in shapes and forms to the diversity of number of species? So let's see. We will start a little bit weird. So we will not start with the cool looking beetles and cool looking crustaceans, but we will start with insect genitalia. So actually, if you will ask any specialist for some group to identify some insects or any other arthropod which which you find, very often this person will somehow figure out whether what you have is a male, and if it is the male, it will somehow explore the male genitalia. The reason for that is that for some reason which we will explore, male genitalia are very different even between species which otherwise look totally the same. So here on the picture is an example of a beetle which has many species in New Guinea. They all look as you can see on the picture. They are basically identical. But when you take the male genitalia from and examine them, so these are these photos around the beetle, you can see even if you don't really understand insects or beetles or this group, so you can still see that I don't know, this one is different from this one, right? Or this one is different from that one. So actually, for some reason, even very similar species very often have very different male genitalia, and we use it for identification. So now the question is, okay, so this is also part of this diversity of shapes, but why it is the male genitalia, right? So why not the other parts of the body? So there were actually several theories developed by different people over the time, and first of that was the something which was called lock and key. So basically, it means that the idea is that males and females are somehow compatible. Their genitalia are somehow fitting each other as the key and the lock. And that means naturally that the species of species A of the male of the species A can only mate with the female of the same species, because if they try or they make a mistake or something and they try with the female of another species, then their genitalia are actually not fitting, right? So the idea was that this is actually something like a natural selection against hybrids. So somehow, for some reason, the idea was that the system evolved in the way that, because hybrids are not a good idea, right? So if something prevents to the formation of hybrids, it can work like that. So this is the lock and key theory. Another thing which was proposed by the famous evolutionary biologist Ernst Mayr in 1963 was something called pleiotropy effect. The idea is that if you have a gene somewhere in the cell, it has some main function, but because it produces some protein, it actually can also affect some other things which are kind of not really related to the main function, right? So kind of randomly, it also affects other things. So the idea of Mayer was that the diversity in shape of genitalia is basically just some kind of side effect of some genes which in reality work for something else. And the third possible kind of hypothesis is that it is something about sex, right? So it is something called sexual selection. So basically, it's about both sexes trying to manipulate the sexual act in order to manipulate the mating in order to benefit from. So how would you actually figure out which of these hypotheses is correct? Normally, once we have different hypotheses, the way how we kind of eliminate some of them is that we make some predictions and then we try to check the data, check the nature, check the animals, and see whether what we predicted is actually there, right? So, what would we predict? So, if we would have the pleiotropy effect, we will start with that thing. If it is random, right? If it is just side effect from some genes which are doing basically something totally different, then there should not be much difference between different groups of insects and different groups of arthropods. And also, there should be not much difference about between different body parts, right? It should be random. So, okay, sometimes it should be about head, sometimes it should be about legs, sometimes it should be about genitalia. So how is it? Actually, it's not really the case, because we have some groups in which this general idea, which I told you, that the genitalia are very diverse and diverse in shape, it is actually not working. For example, in these groups, in this wingless insect or ancestor of insects, right, Collembola and so on, you can see here on the bottom, this is the male and female of Collembola of this animal, the springtail. And you can see nothing. There's a little bit of difference, but there's no crazy structure, right? So, okay, why it's actually not really that crazy. On the other hand, these same animals, the springtails, they actually have crazy structure on antennae. And the antennae are somehow accidentally the body parts by which some of them interact during between before mating. Right? So somehow, okay, something else is very diverse and it's somehow connected to sexual act. Same with some other groups. So for example, we have dragonflies, right? Dragonflies have something called secondary sexual organ. So normally in insects, we were talking about that. Normally in insects, the end of all the organs, the digestive tract or the genital tract of everything is at the end of the abdomen. So it should be here, right? So this is also where the genitalia kind of go out. There is something here, some structure, but actually the real genitalia which the dragonfly is using for mating are here. So it is a male. Maybe you know that once you can see the dragonfly mating, you can see them in this position, this kind of a circle, right? In this photo, the blue one is the male and the brown one is the female. And you can see that the female uses the genital system normally, right? So her genital system is ending here, but she's not kind of having her abdomen close to abdomen of the male, but she's attaching it to here. So here is where the male, where the blue animal has the genitalia. And okay, so it's not really the real genitalia, so it's something where they touch each other during mating. And again, if you check it, it has very many different shapes, and you will very easily find differences between very similar species. Here on the end of the abdomen of the male, there's also something, but that's actually because the male is holding the female, somehow guarding her. He's holding her behind the head, something like that, right? So also it has to match between the male and female. So that's why there's also some kind of structure. It works actually quite interesting. I already told you it works in the way a little bit similar to spiders. That the male before mating actually has to prepare for mating. So the male is kind of transferring his sperm from the real genitalia, which are ending here, to this newly evolved the secondary genitalia here. And only then, once the sperm is deposited here, he is ready for mating. Yeah, in spiders we have something similar. So in spiders, the thing which interact between sexes are genitalia, but also the pedipalps, right? So I have shown you that in male spiders, the pedipalps are somehow super crazy and super complex, and we can easily recognize species by their shape. And then in female, the very diverse part is here. So this is where the female genitalia are opening, right? So again, it's not random, and always the crazy parts which somehow are very diverse in shapes are those which are used during the sex, right? So actually, it's not random as we suggested. It's always somehow connected with the parts of the body which are used for contact between sexes, right? So okay, the pleiotropy effect is actually gone. We can cancel it. We can say, okay, that was the wrong idea. So what about the lock and key theory, right? So that sounds a little bit fine, a little bit better. So actually, if it would be about the male and female genitalia somehow fitting together, then it works, right? So male has some kind of crazy shapes in the spider, in the pedipalp here, and female has crazy shapes here in her genitalia. So somehow it should match together, and it should prevent the mating with the incorrect species. So the first part would actually be is correct, right? So the parts involved in copulation are diverse in shape and they differ between species. Cool, that's fine. Another thing is that if it is lock and key, is like in the real key and lock, then the genitalia needs to be totally of the same shape, right? So your key, if you make a copy of your key to open the door, and if the copy is done not properly, your key will not work, right? So the prediction would be that the genitalia are very similar in all specimens, in all individuals of the same species. And also, because the main purpose of these crazy shapes under this theory would be to prevent the incorrect mating, then we would actually expect that if there are some closer related species, very similar species, living together in the same area, then these two species would need to have very different, very distinct genitalia, right? Because this would be the way how to prevent the incorrect mating. So, okay, how do we stand if we check the real animals? We have one problem. The first problem, or we have more problems, but the first problem is that actually the genitalia shapes vary inside of the species. Here I gave you the example of some moss. I will not explain which part of genitalia is this, but if you dissect its abdomen, you can make a slide, microscopic slide, and it looks like this. And you have this shape here and this shape here, right? And here in the bottom part, there are the shapes of these species in the genitalia in different individuals of the same species. And you can see that they vary, right? They are quite different between different specimens, the same of this side. So that is not fitting our hypothesis, right? Because if it should be lock and key, it should be totally the same in all specimens, all individuals of the species. Another problem is that we can actually sometimes find the hybrids. Yeah, so normally the lock and key should prevent the incorrect mating, the mating of species A with species B. But actually we can find rarely some cases when it happens. So for example, this animal, this super nice butterfly is one of the largest butterflies existing, living somewhere around New Guinea. It's called bird-wing butterfly. And this thing, this very nice male and very nice female, it was described somewhere in the beginning of 20th century as a special, super rare species. But later we found out that actually this is a hybrid. This is a natural hybrid which happens, which is formed when the species, this species, the Ornithoptera victoria, the Victoria birdwing butterfly, and this other species, the Ornithoptera priamus, the priamus birdwing butterfly, mate together. So you can actually even create this hybrids in captivity, which is what the breeders are doing today, because naturally many collectors want to have this in their collections. So they actually are in these islands around New Guinea. They have the farms, and they can purposely cross, puts together the males of one species and females of the other species, and they get this super rare form. So nowadays we know that this is not a real species, it's just a hybrid. Yeah, but it happens even in nature. So actually it also not works properly, right? Somehow does not work like preventing the mistakes of mating. Still, sometimes it happens that one species makes with the opposite sex of the incorrect species and the hybrids are formed. Okay, so that's kind of accumulating some bad things, right? It's still kind of not really fitting our predictions. Even more, so theoretically, if it is, if the shape of genitalia is the function should be for preventing the incorrect mating, then if we have the species which never meet another species, there should not be any morphological diversity, right? Because there's no reason for that. Still, if we, for example, have the cave beetles, the beetles living in caves, they are known that each cave is only inhabited by one beetle, each cave system. So they never meet, and still if you check their genitalia, they are different. The same are some leafhoppers, so these are the Galapagos Islands. In every island we have different species of these leafhoppers, and if you check their genitalia, they are super complex. Here is very simplified drawing, but if you would examine them in reality, they are like super crazy three-dimensional things, and very different between the species. Again, why? These species never meet each other, so they don't actually need to prevent the incorrect mating, right? And the last thing which we would expect is that if we would have two species which actually live more or less separately, but they overlap, they live together in some small area, we would actually expect the genitalia to be more distinct, more different from each other in this area of overlap, right? It is called character displacement. That means like where the species live together, they tend to differ more from each other than in the areas where only one species lives. Again, we don't observe this thing. Okay, to be honest, there are still some studies, few of them, which kind of bring some evidence in support of lock and key theory. So there are some studies of some moth species in which it looks like that the male genitalia have to precisely fit the female genitalia, The reason why is not really to prevent the mating, but the male usually delivers something like a bag of sperm, right? So it's not like a free liquid, it's just basically a sperm packed in like a package. This package is called spermatophore, and this spermatophore has to be deposited in a special kind of pocket of female genital system, where the sperms can be kind of nutrition can be provided with some nutrition. The reason for that is that in many arthropods and most insects, the fertilization of the egg is not happening at the same time as the copulation. So the female actually stores the sperm in this special pocket in her genital system, and then later uses the sperm to fertilize her egg. So the kind of goal of the male is actually to deposit the bag of sperms in this correct pocket. And in this moss, they found that actually, if the shape of the male genitalia is not precisely fitting some kind of small projections in this pocket of the female, this bag of sperm, this package of sperm is not deposited correctly, and the female cannot use it for fertilization. So actually, really, the shape has to really fit to deposit to allow the male to deposit the sperm in the correct position. Something similar was found in some ground beetles from Japan. So okay, in some studies it's working, but generally, basically, it looks like that most of our predictions are not fulfilled. So we suppose today that it's not really the main mechanism, but sometimes it works. If you want to learn more about that and get some examples of which groups work and which groups don't, there is this review article published in 20, I don't know which year, 2020, 2011. Yeah, so you can go there. Cool. So we actually somehow rejected the pleiotropy theory. We kind of more or less rejected the lock and key theory. And the remaining one, which kind of remains, is the sexual selection, right? So the idea is that this complex structures, the complex shapes of genitalia, is the result of effort of both sexes to manipulate the mating. So it was kind of studied in very many different insects, especially. And the prediction is, so what actually should be the benefit, right? So what should be the choice or the kind of manipulation of the female? Female probably wants to have kids, have the offsprings with the best possible male, right? So the female probably wants to choose. For male, the male probably wants to mate with as many females as possible, right? So the prediction would be that the females should be choosy, and they should maybe use the form of the male genitalia to kind of do that choice, right? So this was studied in all these groups, in water striders, in damselflies, in dung beetles, in tsetse flies, and in all of them it was found that it's like that. So really, females are choosy. Females are really selecting males by the shape of their genitalia. So how it works? Well, we will check some cases a little bit more in detail. So here we have the tsetse flies. So these are the kind of big blood-sucking flies living in Africa. It works in the way that the female sucks the blood. During that kind of blood sucking, she's also transmitting the sleeping sickness. So it is kind of actually not a nice insect to meet. And once she has enough blood to kind of nutrition to feed her baby, then she is open. She's kind of willing to copulate. She's willing to have sex, right? So she's kind of searching for the male. She's mating with many males, and somehow she's selecting the best one. We call it cryptic female choice. So basically, the female is mating with many males, And somehow the males naturally don't know that the female is choosy, and the female is somehow selecting from all these males with whom she's mating, she's selecting the best one. So it was studied how this selection process actually works. And what was found that during the mating, the male is actually kind of grasping the end of female abdomen with some kind of tweezers, right? So he has some kind of projections here, which are touching the female. So it was kind of hypothesized that maybe it's about this. So they did two things. They tried to cut this part of the male body, and in another set of experiments, they actually covered the abdomen of the female by the nail polish. So the female actually cannot feel any touches, right? In both cases, would they do any kind of manipulation affecting this contact of male and female? The success of mating was much lower. So basically, the result was that the ovulation probability, the probability that the egg is released later, decreased, and also the success of sperm transfer decreased, was lower. And if they cut this part of the male body, or if they nail polish if they cover the abdomen of the female by nail polish, the female also was very willing to mate with another males, right? So it was clear that the mating success of the couple actually is improved by the proper stimulation of the female by the male genitalia. So basically, female is doing the choice based on how well she was uh, stimulated during the copulation by the male. If she was stimulated well, she considers the male better, right? If she was stimulated not properly, she does not select that male. If that works like that, right? So if it is something like females are choosy and they are using actually the quality of stimulation by males as the selection criterion, then we can actually also predict something, right? So if it works like that, then the male genitalia should be more crazy and more diverse in those species and those groups which actually have this multiple mating, right? That when one female mates with multiple males. So this was really done. This is a famous study done by Göran Almqvist, and he actually compared some closer related groups. So in this case, in the pictures, there are some flies, and he always selected one group in which we know that they are so-called monandros. So that means that the female only mates with one male, right? So they are not making this kind of mating with many and then select. They just mate with one partner. And they compared it with some group which was more or less related, which have this mating with multiple males. And here you can see the one of the example, right? So this group, this Cladocheta, is so-called polyandro, so the females mate with multiple males. And you can see that the shape of the genitalia is crazy, right? And here is some kind of close related another fly called Lucilia, and here the shape between the species is more or less similar and not that crazy, right? So it looks like that it really works. Also, in extreme case, we have even cases in insects where they form the monogamous couples. Typical examples are termites. So they have this swarm. It will happen actually now because it started to rain. So soon you will see many winged termites out. So this is when the males and females go out of the nest. They swarm. They fly. During the flight, they are mating, and then the male and female actually go down. They lose the wings and they make the nest. And for all the time of the nest, this one male and this one female are living there together. So they are really strictly monogamous. In this case, they don't need any crazy genitalia to make some choice, and it really works like that. So their genitalia are very reduced membranous, and you would not find any crazy shapes or morphology in termites. Now the question is, right? So, okay, let's accept it looks like that the evidence shows that in at least in many insects, many arthropods, the females are the choosy ones, and they use the shape of male genitalia to select the good partner or good father for their babies, right? But why tsetse fly, which we used an example, should be choosy, right? So as I told you, the female sucks blood, then it mates, and then it gets pregnant. But actually in this fly, it is a very special group of flies because they are not only laying eggs as normal fly is doing, but they are actually growing their larva inside of their body. They have something similar to the mammal uterus, and they even have some special gland called milk gland, which is producing some kind of liquid which actually feeds the larva. So actually they are really pregnant. They are really carrying the baby inside of them, and the larva goes out of the female only at the moment when the larva is actually ready to pupate. Right? So it goes out, and at the same moment it actually changes directly to pupa. So it never feeds outside. Uh, the consequence of that naturally is that the larva has to be huge. The larva carried by the female is as large as the female herself. Yeah, here we have the comparison of the relative size of the baby before being born, in lion, human, vampire bat, and tsetse fly, right? So in human use, you know that it's already quite crazy that once there are women which are shortly before the birth, giving the birth, that the belly is super big and they have problems to kind of walk normally. It's probably not very comfortable and so on. But in human, the baby to be born forms only around 6% of the body volume of the mother. In the tsetse fly, the baby is as heavy as the mother. So you can imagine that it costs super lots of energy, right? The female has to invest so much energy to feed the larva, to carry it, to care of the baby. And naturally that makes it choosy, right? So if the females invest a lot into carrying and into growing their offsprings, they have to be choosy because if they make a bad choice, they invest lots of energy into the not very good babies. Males in contrast don't need to invest that much usually, right? They basically just provide sperm. They mostly don't care about the offsprings. So for them, the strategy should be different. The best strategy for a male, in a typical arthropod, is to actually have as many babies as possible, right? Okay, some of them will be with not very good female, but since the male will make many, at least some of them will be probably very good, very successful, very big, very sexy, and so on. So we actually that's the reason why we have the sexual conflict, right? So we have eager males. We have males which want to have sex with any female around. And we have a choosy females which actually want to choose only the best males. And that means that actually each sex tries to manipulate the opposite sex in some way, right? So the male somehow wants to manipulate the female to copulate easily. The female wants to manipulate the male to kind of prevent from copulation or to do it somehow that the female can actually choose. So it's basically the sexual selection. You can kind of translate it in a kind of very simplified way as something like war of sexes, right? So it's something like men against women, males against females. So it was studied in many different animals, many different arthropods. The interesting thing naturally is that each species has a little bit different strategy, right? So we can actually select different species of arthropods. We can study how their sexual system works, and then we can figure out whether it affects, for example, the morphology or biology or something like that. So, for example, one of the model group for studying the sexual conflict is the seed beetles. These are the beetles which you normally find infesting your beans, right? So, if you find some beetle infesting your bean bag which you bring from the market, then it probably will be this beetle. So, its larva is actually developing inside of the bean seeds. And some of these beetles are polygamous. So they actually have different strategy. So it's not before we have something which was called polyandrous. That was the one female mates with multiple males. Here we have polygamous. Gamous means something with female. Poly means many, right? So many females. So here one male mates with more females. So the male strategy here is actually to uh, kind of mate with as many females as possible. The males are here in this species are very aggressive. And this is somehow, unfortunately, looks very, very kind of horrible now, what I will tell you. It's actually not enough for the male. So the male has to mate with as many females as possible. But if everybody is doing that in your bag of beans, then the problem is that how you can be sure that the same female will not be mated by another male after you, right? So the male also tries to manipulate the female to prevent her to mate with another next male. The way how this is done is very violent, and it is done by the spines and the top of the male's genitalia. These spines, it was kind of a mystery why these spines are there. And then there was a study published in Nature actually showing that the function of these spines is actually to hurt the female. The logic is that once the female is hurt, once her genital system is hurt, then if she would mate with another male, she would actually risk to die. And that's why for the female it's actually more advantageous to lay egg using the sperm of this male which hurt her, because for the next mating she maybe would not survive. So it's better to have bad offsprings than no offsprings, right? So okay, the male tries to manipulate in this horrible way, but females actually try to do something against. What can be done? So one thing is that the walls of the genital tract are actually getting thicker. That means they are not that easy to be hurt. And they also develop some spines at the basis of the uterus, which somehow prevent the female the male to be to kind of be aggressive, right? So they can still they offer some kind of little bit counter thing against the aggressivity of the male. Even more interestingly, you can have these animals, can have these violent beetles in their culture, in breeding in your lab. And in one experiment, they actually, for many generations, they pressed them to mate only once. So they basically allowed the male and female, they put one male, one female together. They only allowed them to mate once, and the male was never giving, getting the chance to mate with another female. What happened was that over many generations, the genitalia of the male started to change. So originally, the genitalia was very spiny, and the wall of the female genital system was very thick. And once they were pushed to be monogamous, they were kind of only mating one male with one female, and they were not allowed to do anything else. Over many generations, the size of the spines of the male genitalia gets smaller until they disappeared, and the thickness of the female genitalia wall get finer and finer, like less and less thick, right? So it was nicely shown that these structures are really correlated and that they really are connected with this aggressive polygamous behavior of the males in this species. Another group where this works, this conflict of sexes, is in water striders. So water striders are the bugs, are the true bugs, which you can find on the surface of the water. They are kind of riding there, and in most cases, also the males are very aggressive and they try to force the females to mate, right? So in many groups, the males have some kind of specially shaped legs, hind legs, by which they try to grasp the female to not to allow her to escape before the mating and kind of basically aggressively mate her. And but naturally, again, the females try to fight back, right? You can even recognize which species has this aggressive males and which not by how they look like. So in the species where the males are not aggressive, so they don't have any sexual conflict or not that strong. The males and females, this is the abdomen, so this is this part of the water strider. The male and female look very similar, so they are nearly the same, right? So this is, for example, in this species, there are no aggressive males. That means no sexual conflict, and both sexes actually look the same. In another species, for which we know that there's a very strong sexual conflict, the males are very aggressive. The shape of the abdomen looks different between male and female. The reason is that the male tries to have the shape of the abdomen, which is kind of able to grasp the female and kind of force her to mating, but the female is developing some kind of spines on her abdomen to prevent that, right? So there are some forces, there are some evolutionary forces to make them looking different. In one species, this is kind of a super crazy example. The female even developed a very special structure at the end of her abdomen. So normally it works in the way that the genital opening of the female is not protected. It's just freely open. So if it happens that the male, for example, very aggressively kind of takes the female, then the female has no choice and she has to copulate. But in this species, the female evolved something like a special kind of system in her abdomen that the genital opening is actually not open, not freely accessible. It's hidden inside of the body. You can see here, this is the genital opening of the female, and the female has to somehow open it by herself. So in other words, in this species, the male can be as aggressive as he wants, but even if he kind of aggressively takes the female is the one who decides. The female just is not exposing her genital system, so the male cannot really copulate anyway, right? So in this case, the behavior adapted totally different. So the aggressive males cannot be successful in this species, and the female has to be somehow persuaded by the male to kind of open their genital system, right? So they actually started to have some kind of very nice communication between the sexes before the mating. They communicate by the waving of the water surface. Yeah, so actually you can see that the sexual conflict, the sexual selection can also not only lead to developing of new structures like a new crazy end of abdomen, but also a new types of behavior. Last example, so that was actually the traditional studying model was the damselfly, so this is a part of dragonflies. And here actually the female mates with multiple, the female mates with multiple males. There's a mistake. So female mates with multiple males, so this is this polyandrous version, right? She stores the sperm bag, the package of sperms of all the females, and she selects. The idea was that actually the last male which mated her is the one who is the father of her babies, right? So actually the males are competing with each other in the community to be the last one who copulates with her. So this is called sperm competition. So it's actually many males copulate with the same female, and they kind of compete for whose sperm will be those used for fertilizing the egg. It was found already in very old studies that in the male genitalia of, so here the male is the green one, the male genitalia of this animal, there are big hooks. And the first idea was that these hooks actually are used for like a mechanical thing to take out the sperm of the previous male and to deposit the new one, right? The new sperm. Because it was naturally that they investigated the sperm bags, this kind of special pockets in the female genitalia where the sperm is stored, and they found that after the copulation, the sperm package was exchanged. But the new study actually showed that these projections are not really kind of mechanically taking out the sperm of the previous male, but they are stimulating the female in the way that it feels like the egg being laid. So actually, this is kind of an instinct. Once the female feels something like that, she releases the sperm to fertilize the egg, right? So if she's stimulated in the correct way, she releases by herself the sperm of the previous male, and the new male can be sure that his sperm will be used for the offsprings. So this is what we call sperm competition. So just to make a summary, we have seen many cases when the complex structure of genitalia or even some sexual behavior can result from the effort of both sexes to manipulate, right? So they want to manipulate the result of the mating. So one of the possibility was the so-called sexy sons or good genes. So this is when the female is actually kind of choosy and selects the male for the best one. The idea is that if you select the best father for your kids, your sons will be also attractive, will be also good, right? So this is the so one thing is the sexy sons thing. So the offspring will be kind of will inherit the attractivity of the best selected male, or the good genes, right? If you select the really good male, you guess that he also has a good genes for survival, for other things. Another possibility is this sperm competition I told you. So this is about the kind of male to male competition of who is the father. And another thing can be the sexual conflict. So it's basically not really like a cryptic female choice, like female choosing, but without any manipulations. She just mates with many things and then many males and then chooses. But here's the like direct try to manipulate the behavior or the way of the sexual interaction, which goes into this kind of arms race. The specific mechanisms probably differ between groups, but in general, the sexual selection is now considered as the main driver of all these crazy structures connected with the sexual interactions. Okay, so now we understand some kind of background reasons for why some part of the body of the arthropods can be crazy in shapes, right? Why genitalia or other things connected with sex are crazy in shape because sexual selection. But can we actually also find some structures which are not genitalia, which are still somehow crazy in shape, but because of sexual selection, but they are not genitalia? It can be actually any body part which is involved somehow in sexual interaction, right? So, for example, in diving beetles, which are a special group of water beetles living in water, uh, the males have on their front legs here, they have something like a big white plate with many kind of suckers. Suckers, this is you know it from the if you want to hang something on your fridge. Okay, you can buy the magnet, but if you don't buy the magnet and you want to something, you can also buy the sucker, right? It is kind of a rubber kind of bell or something, and if you push it, it kind of sucks on the flat surface of the fridge. So they have a structure which is very similar to that on their front legs. And the idea is because these beetles actually in water and they are very good swimmers. So their body shape has to be very hydrodynamic, right? Hydrodynamic means that very flat and shiny without any structures. And actually, this is very difficult for the male to grasp the female. So they develop this kind of special attachment organs on their front legs, which allows them to actually attach to the female and kind of aggressively take her. You can see here on this picture. I cannot really play video here on the recorded things, but you can go to this link and you will see the video with kind of real behavior. But how it works is that once the male, which is this specimen on the top, is able to attach his front legs like firmly to the female body surface, then the female is actually pressed to mate. The reason is that they actually are underwater, but they still need to breathe the air above the water, and they pump it by the end of the abdomen. But you can see that here the female actually has no access to the water surface, right? So the female sooner or later is losing the oxygen. That actually means that if she wants to breathe again, she has to kind of allow the male to copulate. So once the female is kind of taken by the male, again, it's the same story. Then she has not much chance. That's why the females are developing some counter thing again. So they try to escape this manipulation. And the way which they do is that they develop some structures on the elytra, right? You know that if you have these suckers which you want to put on your fridge, it works very nicely on a very flat surface. But if your fridge is some of these special one which has some kind of wrinkled or not really super flat surface, it's very difficult to put it there, and if you try, it will be falling down or again and again. So the logic here is the same. If the females do some structures, if they don't make their body surface flat, then this attachment things of the males will not work. And it works even more crazily. So if it happens over the time in the same population of the same species, the male starts to develop different shapes of the sucking discs, right? Normally it has quite low number of moderate to large ones. If the females start to have some kind of structure on their elytra, they started to develop very many small and few huge, which are actually better suited to work if the surface is not totally flat. So it's kind of a real race between males and females. Male is doing something, the female is doing some counteraction to not to make the kind of manipulation from the side of the male so effective, and the male is adapting to the counteraction by improving his attachment structures to try to still manipulate, and in the next step the female is doing even more complex surface of her body to escape the manipulation again, and so on and so on. Another example, you probably have seen that, or if you haven't seen, if once you go to the forest, look around, these flies are living here in Taiwan. They are called stalk-eyed flies, and actually both sexes have this kind of weird eyes on the stalks. Again, you can watch the video here how these stalks are formed. It's actually very cool because naturally the larva and pupa don't have them, so they are kind of pumped. You will see. Watch the video. So the male and female both have that, but males have the eyes stalks longer. And how it works. So this special structure, the stalks, actually work something like a sign of the male to be a strong one. So first thing, the males are actually kind of fighting for the suitable mating places, right? They don't really fight in the way that they would kind of beat each other. They just measure the size of the eyes. They kind of do some kind of dancing. They don't really touch. They just dance close to each other. They measure who is wider, and the male who is wider is winning without actually really touching the other male. So this is the This is the first step. And then the female, once the females find some kind of this mating place and there are multiple males kind of ready, the female is always selecting the widest male, right? So the idea is that if you select the widest male, then your son probably will get the good genes for the bright head, right? For the long eye stalks. That means that he will be more successful in finding the better mating place, and he will be more often chosen by the female. So he will also have more babies, right? So this is this sexy son's uh, kind of strategy. And on top of that, if you can imagine that when the male looks like this, it's very difficult, or more difficult to fly than if you are a normal fly without this weird head, right? So another thing which this structure actually indicate is that if the male has a very wide eyes, and it's very difficult for him to fly, and still he made it. He survived. He found the correct mating place. He was not eaten by some bird and so on. That means that it has to be super strong male, right? So this is kind of indicating a good condition and good genes of this specimen. So this is this good gene way of selection. Another thing which affects how wide the eyes are, how big is the specimen, is how well the larva of this fly was eating. The larva of the flies in general, fly larvae, they cannot really much choose. They basically just eat where they hatch, right? So the female puts the egg somewhere, the larva hatches and eats things around. But if the specimen is big, it actually means that the mother of that specimen placed the eggs in the very good, very nutritious substrate, very nutritious place. That means also that also somehow indicates that the mother of this specimen had very good sense of selecting a very good food for the babies, right? So it also indicates something about the female actually. So this brightness, the width of the eyes is actually used as the kind of indicator of the qualities of the parents of this animal. Uh, and naturally, the females are not thinking that way, but over the millions of years of evolution, this evolved as a sign of the quality of the specimen. It works actually very similar. This logic, how it works in the stock-eyed flies, is the same what you maybe know, maybe not, in other more kind of famous animals, right? So if you know the peacock, peacock has this big tail feathers, which also are kind of crazy cool and so on. But it also makes it very difficult for the peacock to fly and very easy to be eaten by the predators. So if some big strong male survives with that, it also indicates that probably this specimen is very strong and has good genes. The same for the birds of paradise, right? So the special super decorative birds which are in New Guinea. The males also have some long, very bright feathers and so on. So this is actually the same logic. Okay, now the question. So we know that the diversity of forms, shapes, and crazy things is driven in most cases by sexual selection, right? But can actually the strong sexual selection cause that the group has more species? So it was actually tested. So we already know that once we have some species in which male and female looks very different, when there's so-called sexual dimorphism, we can guess it was I showed you that thing in the water striders. If the male and female looks quite different, we can guess that there is some conflict between sexes, right? So again, there was a study done by Mesov in 2002 by different comparing different groups of dragonflies, and again he always selected the pairs of genera in which one of them was with very strong sexual dimorphism. That means that we can guess that there is some sexual conflict, say some effort to manipulate the mating by males and females in this genus. And then some close related one when they actually look nearly the same, right? So as in the water striders, if they look nearly the same, there's probably less effort to manipulate. Maybe the females are not that choosy. Maybe they just mate with one partner or something like that. And this guy, in this study, he actually compared the number of known species for this group, which has probably no sexual conflict, and this group where probably some sexual conflict is happening. And always he found that the group with sexual dimorphism and with sexual conflict are more species rich, right? So there's definitely some connection of the sexual selection and the morphological diversity and the species diversity. Something similar was also found for different other groups of insects. So in here they did not really compare how they look like, but they actually know from the biology studies of these groups whether they are these groups in which one female mates with multiple males, this polyandrous thing, and they compared that with some similar related thing where only one male and one female copulate, like monoandrous. And again, they compared number of species, and always in the one where actually the female mates with multiple males and can do this cryptic female choice, can do this kind of selection of males and actually manipulate the result of the mating. Always these groups have more species than those which don't have the conflict, right? So there's definitely some connection between whether there is the selection, whether there is a sexual conflict and the number of species. How can it work? Why it is like that, right? I can show you the example or the way how it may work on the example of these bush crickets. So these are kind of huge bush crickets living somewhere in Europe. And bush crickets, it works in the way that the male is actually singing, is kind of chirping, is producing some sound, right? It's making a song, and the female select the male based on the song. So they kind of evaluate who is the good male based on the attractivity of the song. So what the researchers did, you can actually record the males and you can manipulate in a computer the song and then play it to the females and see the reaction, right? So they did it. So they actually recorded the song. The song is consisting of repeating kind of pieces. They call it syllables, right? And they made artificially in computer different songs with different number of repetitions. And they played it for the females in two different areas. So it's still the same species. One was in the Mediterranean area, so it was like the southern Europe, and one was in the Pyrenees Mountains, which are the mountains between France and Spain. And you can see here the higher we are with on the y-axis, the more it was attractive for the female. The lower we are, the less attractive it is, and if it is around 0.5, there's actually no preference, right? The female just mate, but they don't have any strong preference for them. And you can see that in the Mediterranean region, the most preferred song had only something like between 1 and 2 repetitions, 1 and 2 syllables. And if they were longer, they were less and less and less attractive. In the other population, in the mountains, the Pyrenees Mountains, the most attractive song was with something like 5 to 6 repetitions, 5 to 6 syllables, right? Then they actually checked how the males in these populations are singing. So they found out that in the Mediterranean population, the males actually are using the song which is the most attractive for the females in that population, right? In the other population in the mountains, The males have more syllables, so they have between 3 and 4 compared to this between 1 and 2 in this other population. But they actually still use the suboptimal. If they would developed or evolved the longer song, they would still be more attractive, but it's not existing. They're mostly singing kind of in the suboptimal way, but because nobody sings better, they are still considered as attractive, right? So you can actually imagine that if you would take some males from this mountain population and you will offer them to the females from this Mediterranean population, they would still sing between 3 and 4, right? So they will be much less attractive for the females than the males living in this population naturally, right? The same if you take some males from here, from the Mediterranean population, and bring them to this population. They will only have songs with between 1 or 2 syllables. So they will be very unattractive for the females, who will basically preferably mate with the native males from for that area, which will sing the nicer song, right? So in this way, there's already some kind of preference for the males of the region. So you can imagine that if it happens that now these two populations for some reason overlap, they will not mix again, right? The females will still continue to prefer the males of the same population. So that means that they will actually start to be somehow isolated from each other and they will more easily diverge into two different species. Right? So in this way, the sexual selection, this kind of, in this case, the cryptic female choice, can actually lead to kind of evolution of two species from the original one. So this kind of thing which I have just shown you is called divergent sexual selection. Okay, so now we were talking about sex for nearly 1 hour. So now the question is, can actually some crazy body shape evolve also without sex? So, okay, can we be so crazy to say, okay, everything what we see in arthropods, which is cool and crazy and colorful, is because of sex, or is there some other way? There's actually some other way, right? So we, for example, have these tree hoppers, these kind of cool animals which have some kind of nice structures on their thorax. It can look like a thorns, it can look like a bird shit, it can look like a colorful thorn, it can look like the ant, it can look like a leaf. So in this case, it's always the same structure. It's this kind of part of the thorax, and it kind of get a new function, right? So one of that is a crypsis. So basically, I want to look like some part of plant. So the predator will not eat me because he doesn't even recognize that I'm an insect, right? Or I want to look like a bird shit because the insect predators are not eating bird shit. So if you look like a bird dropping, then you are safe. Then it can be mimicry, right? It can be kind of, I can try to look like somebody else who is actually not very good food. For example, if I look like the ant, so the ants always have the stings and they can defend themselves, right? So if some birds try to eat the ants, they can kind of get kind of painful and hurt. So they learn to avoid ants. So if this insect looks like the ant, it's actually protected. It can be also mechanic defense. So if you have such a spines on your body and some bird tries to eat you, it's actually very difficult to swallow. And it can be aposematic. It can be a colorful signal saying, I am really hard to eat, don't even try. And so this one structure actually evolved in different species in very different ways to kind of signal that. You can see that here is the animal which is kind of cut as a micro CT kind of model, and you can see that this structure on the thorax is basically hollow. It's just nothing in there, not even muscles. It's just there. It's just a special structure, but it doesn't have any muscles. It doesn't have any other special things. So this is an example how an old structure so the thorax, which is there in all insects, somehow gets a new function and it starts to work for something new, right? Another example of the same are actually the elytra of beetles, right? We have been talking about why they are so kind of good for beetles, why beetles started to be such a successful group thanks to them. So the elytra are modified first pair of wings, which instead of being membranous, prepared for fly, they actually turned to be something like a hard shelters, hard cover of the second pair of wings, which are membranous. They should kind of protect the flying wings, the flight wings, and that allows beetles to live in some very narrow spaces without damage their second pair of wings, right? But naturally, if your first pair of wings is turned to be just a cover, then you actually don't need it. It's out of the kind of constraint, right? So before in all the other insects, even the first pair of wings is serving for flight. It can be only in one special shape because if it changes to something else, it will not be good for flight. The insect would not be able to fly, right? Here, because it's not used to for flight, it's suddenly free for some new function, right? So here the elytra, the first pair of wings, were actually released for some new function. They are free to change because they are actually not limited by being used for flight. So that means that they can make some spines, thorns, coloration. They can be used for many different cool things and new things which they were not used for in any other insects before, right? Another example are this kind of raptorial, so-called raptorial legs. So these are the legs used for catching another insects. So this naturally also can only happen once the legs, this first pair of legs, is kind of released from the original function, right? So if your leg is still serving for walking, then it cannot look like this. It would not work. But in all these animals, you can see that we have actually not only praying mantises, which you know, but we also have the false mantises. This is totally different group, but also has these legs. And we also have some flies, which have this kind of leg. But you can see that they are only walking using the second and third pair of legs, right? So the first pair of legs is not used for walking, and that's why it got free for something new, and it changed the shape for being the raptorial legs. Another example of the same is the enlarged mandibles of stag beetles, right? So you know these school beetles, they're actually the males have very big mandibles, and they are the reason for that is they are used for male fights before mating. But that was only possible. So the structure is old, like every insect has the mandible, but normally mandible is used for chewing, for eating. Here, the mandibles got a new function for fighting male to male. They got huge, but it actually means that they cannot be used for the original function, right? So they are not used for feeding anymore, and that's why these beetles actually are only able to lick. So they are licking some liquid food. If you have the stag beetles at home, you can have them as pets. You usually buy them some jelly, and they actually just come and lick the jelly. They cannot really bite, they cannot really chew anything. Another possibility is that we have totally new structures, right? So good examples for that are the horns of scarab beetles. So you know that many beetles have some kind of weird horns on their thorax or head, or light production organs or fireflies. So we don't have that much time, so I will only tell you about the horns of the scarab beetles because these beetles are kind of popular and you probably know them. So it's actually also kind of a very cool story and is a very good evolutionary model as well. So similarly as in stag beetles, in scarab beetles the horns are used for male-male fights, right? So different species of beetles actually have kind of different shape of these horns because they are kind of using them as a different tool. And so here is some kind of example. So for example, in this Tripoxylus, The horn is kind of multi spines on the end. It's used as this tool, kind of to hold the another male and throwing him out from the tree. In Dynastes beetles, they work more like a scissors, so they kind of should grasp the other male and throw it out. In Golofa, they are more like sword, right? So they basically the style of the fighting differs in different beetles, and based on that, the shape of the horns are kind of adapted. Uh, Sometimes in many groups they are not used only for fights male to male, but they also are used to defend the resource. So, for example, in dung beetles, the big male is kind of guarding the tunnel into which the female is taking the pieces of dung and laying the eggs for the larvae. So he's kind of defending the tunnel from other beetles. And so here you can see that the structures of these horns can be quite crazy. So they are quite very different structure in very different species. Here is a little bit explanation for how it works in these dung beetles, right? Because these dung beetles are actually very frequent model system for studying these things. So just let's try to understand how they live. So they are dung beetles. They live in dung. That basically means shit, right? So if somebody kind of poops, let's say the cow poops and leaves some cow dung in the pastures, many beetles are coming and they're actually making tunnels below the dung, and the females are taking the pieces of dung down. They make something like balls and they lay the eggs inside of the balls, and the larvae are then feeding on them, right, underground. The females don't have horns. The males do. So males are those which are fighting with each other, which you can see here, and who are actually also guarding the entrance to the tunnels. But then we have small males. This is this one. Small males basically look like females. They don't have any horns. And their strategy is totally different. So they cannot actually win if they fight with the big male, right? So the strategy is kind of sneaky. So they can, the one thing is which is kind of not very good is in the big males. The big males, because of the horns, they actually cannot go inside of the tunnel. They can guard the entrance, but they are too big, they are too kind of crazy that they actually don't fit into the tunnel, so they cannot climb down. The small males without the horns, they're actually digging side tunnels and they try to find the tunnel of some female. If they sneak in, then they can mate with the female without the big male even noticing, right? So they have a different strategy how to find a sexual partner. Now we have a crazy situation, right? So in one species, if we take the male, we actually have the male which has very different shape of the horn. So all these specimens are males of one species. And you can see that we have small male without any horn and some kind of still quite small man with super tiny horn. And that at some moment, with reaching some size, suddenly the horn starts to suddenly appear, right? So it basically the beetle has something like a switch, some threshold size between the small males, which looks more like a female, and the big male, which looks more like a huge huge male with the horn. We can even kind of make a curve. So if you have a larva, you can always weigh the larva, right? So you know how heavy it is. This is the x axis. Then you wait. You let the specimen pupate. You wait, and then you measure the horn. So you can make this kind of graph. You can make some kind of median line, and you can see that we have the small males. If they are small, they have a small horn, and after kind of reaching some size, suddenly the small ones switch to the large ones, right? The scaram horns are actually crazy because how they actually form. The very weird thing is that if you have the pupa, Even the pupa of the female has the horn, but in female the horn disappears. In male the horn is kind of kept, is still there. That's because it was very confusing when I saw it for the first time. I was also very confused, like why? What's the reason why? Because in the pupa it doesn't have any function, right? But actually it turns out that the original function of the horn is not for fight. Original function of the horn, it was actually in the pupa to help to remove the old skin of the larva. Because in the larva is feeding in this piece of shit underground and has very strong cuticle on the head surface. But once the pupa is formed, this cuticle, this old skin has to go out, right? And it's actually very difficult to remove the head cuticle. So that's why the new structure formed, and it helps to kind of pull out the head, the head capsule, the cuticle of the head, and to free the pupa out of the skin of the larva, right? Without that, they would actually have problems, and many of the larvae dies. So this structure was there actually for helping with the kind of change from larva to pupa, not for fighting. But then what happened was that it was kept in the male, and it was kind of maintained in the male, and it was a male adult, and it was turning to the horn, and the horns got some new function for fighting. The way why in male and why in female is male is kept and the female is lost is about the gene expression. This DLL gene, if it is expressed at the top of the horn of the pupa, it's kept even in the adult. If it is expressed not at the top but somewhere else, then the horn is lost, right? So then the female morphology is produced. What is crazy is that if we make this graph of when at which body size the males change from the small one to the big one, right? So these are these curves which I showed you, this one. And we make it for different species. So different species, this is here this graph. This is the white one, the triangle one, and the black one, right? So you can see that each of them has quite different way. In this species, this is the size when it changes from small male to big male, like this is still the size. In this species, the change is somewhere here, but there's actually a very small difference between the big male and small male. And in this black species, the change is somewhere at this body size, and there's big difference between the big male and small male, right? So different species actually have this curve quite different. It is somehow regulated by hormones, actually, what happens with the larva based on its size. If we take closer related species, it will naturally be more similar, right? But still different. You can see that the black one here is still having slightly different size when the change between the small to big male happens. What is even crazy is the last graph. The last graph are three populations of the same species. Populations in USA, populations in Western Australia and Eastern Australia. It was actually introduced there as a mean to control the cow shit which was accumulated on the pastures and the pastures of Australia, because Australia there were no cows before, right? There are no these kinds of mammals there, and they also don't have any beetles taking care of of the cow shit. So the shit was accumulating on the pastures. Some flies started to breed in there, and they were causing big problems. So there were actually some big research done. There was big research done on which dung beetles can help, and this species, this Ontophagus taurus, was introduced to Australia, and we precisely know when. So it happens 40 years ago. So these three populations are separated for 40 years, and you can already see that they start to slightly differ in how the curve looks like. So when actually the small and big male are switched at what body size. Why this is interesting? There's a so-called trade-off. Trade-off is something like either or, right? If the male has the big horn, then actually it somehow has to be taken from all the energy stored in the larva. And it's shown that it actually means that its genitalia will be smaller. Yeah, so if the horn changes, if the male switch from the small one to the big one at some size of the larva, then it affects also the genital morphology. And you already know because of all the sexual selection thing that once the genital morphology is affected, it can affect the all the sexual selection things, and it can also affect formation of new species. It can cause the formation of new species, right? So this seems to be the reason why this genus of dung beetle is Ontophagus is the most crazy genus of insects. This is a genus which nowadays has more than 2,400 species. And the reason probably is because it somehow develops these horns. Thanks to that, it starts to be somehow having very special way of development. The development can very easily diverge, very easily differ between populations which are separated for a very short time. And once they slightly differ, they can affect sexual selection and affect or cause the formation of species, cause the isolation between species. Cool. So now another reasons for morphological diversity, we will already just go through it very, very quickly. Can you see the insect here? Probably you can, right? Maybe not. So, okay, here's the praying mantis. It's the eyes here. Actually, the whole animal is the praying mantis here, right? There's a flower praying mantis. So this is so-called crypsis, camouflage, right? The insect tries to look like something else, tries to look like flower, tries to look like bark in this case, tries to look like leaf, tries to look like twig. Why to be camouflaged? In case of the praying mantis, it's easy because she doesn't want to be seen by the prey, right? By some other insect which it is catching. Okay, this is also crypsis, also camouflage, and stick insect this time, right? So can you see this insect here? It's very good camouflage, right? It's somewhere here. This thing is eating plants, so it's definitely not hiding to catch some poor insects, but it's hiding because it doesn't want to be seen by predators, right? So it's another reason why camouflage is working, the kind of protection from predators. And actually, this is also present in other arthropods. I'm showing you many insect examples this presentation, but here are some examples from the crustaceans. Yeah, I have shown you before the skeleton shrimps, which are kind of living on this special type of corals, and they are kind of looking very special to look very similar. Or here's some crab which is actually also mimicking the coral on which it is living. Another possibility, so this is basically the reason, the important thing about that is that the shape is diverse because of interactions with other organisms, right? So I interact with other organisms in the way that I don't want to be seen by them, right? Another interaction, the opposite one, is actually something like I want to be seen by them and I want to warn them, right? So aposematic or warning coloration basically means that that the insect is somehow poisonous. It's not edible. If you eat it, you will be either die because it's really venomous, or you will just be vomiting and feeling very bad. So they say, "Oh no, don't eat me. I am toxic." Right? That's warning. Another thing is so-called evasive mimicry. It's not really about toxicity, it's about being hard to catch, right? So there are actually many beetles which are looking like flies. Yeah, so this is the beetle, this is the beetle, this is the fly. Why is that? So you know that it is quite difficult to catch the fly, right? They are flying very quickly, and to catch the fly by hand, let's say, it's very difficult. So also for the birds to catch the fly is actually quite a hard job. So if something looks like a fly, the birds or the other predators know that, okay, I will not even try because I never succeeded with this animal, right? So the insect is actually kind of protected by looking like a fly, even though this insect is very slow moving, actually. Then these mimicry things can be combined. So there's this kind of textbook examples of so Batesian mimicry. So that's called by after the Bates, who was the uh, person who discovered them. And that actually means that some species which actually is not toxic, it's easy to eat, it's very tasty, but it mimics the toxic one, right? So here you have the example, the famous example of one species of Papilio. This is the African species of butterfly called Papilio dardanus, and the females of it can actually look very different in very different part or in different part of Africa. Why is that? Because in every range, every area, they mimic another species of toxic butterfly, right? So in this area, they mimic this one, so they look like that. In another area, they mimic this one, so they look like this. In another area, they mimic this one, so they look like that. So they are very, even though it's the same species, they can look very different. Males are always looking the same. So this is the case when the edible thing tries to look like something not edible, right? So this Bayesian mimicry, the idea is that we have the toxic so-called model. So you can imagine the wasp. So this is the really dangerous thing which can sting you. And then we have some edible thing, the so-called mimic, which is actually just trying to look like the toxic one, and it can kind of evoke in the predator's mind that it's probably the poisonous one, right? The bird once it see this thing, oh, it's discoloration. No, everything which has discoloration is toxic, right? So it's dangerous. I will not eat it. And by this way, the things are protected. This is another case. So many caterpillars, many larvae of butterflies and moths in tropical forest actually look on the close-up as a little bit like a snake head, right? They have some kind of fake eyes. These are not really eyes. These are just color spots. But they try to look like, they look a little bit like snakes, and they also look as something dangerous, potentially dangerous, even through the caterpillars are actually usually very easy to eat. Another thing which works this way are these eye spots in many moths and butterflies, right? So this also is kind of works in the way that, oh, I'm suddenly showing it and I'm kind of shocking the predator because it suddenly looks like that there's some bigger animal looking at me, right? So I look like somebody else. I try to be not to look like a butterfly. Another case, so there are some spiders, for example, which are looking like ants. Yeah, so this is the jumping spider, actually. A jumping spider, and this is kind of, it's called Myrm arachne, and it's looking like ant, and this is protecting them from predators because ants are the dangerous things, like nobody eats them that much. There are some other cases, so this is the spider. This is also the spider. This is also the spider. I think all of them are actually the spiders, right? So this looks like ants, but actually it's not. But it has some cost. There's some nice paper published 3 years ago, which shows that it's protecting them, protecting these spiders from being attacked because they look like ants, so they are kind of protected. They look like something dangerous. But naturally, this kind of change of shape also causes that they are not very good at jumping, right? So they're actually not, they are much worse at catching the prey, catching their food than the normal jumping spiders. Another case of mimicry is something called Müllerian mimicry. And this is the case when all species which look the same are all really toxic. So it's not like fake. Here, all species which are kind of showing this kind of warning coloration are really toxic. But the weird thing is that they all look similar, right? So here is the complex of one species. This is the one in the green frames. Again, in different areas, it kind of looks similar as different species. So one species, this species can look very different in different areas, and it tries to just mimic another toxic species in the same area. How it works? So we can actually see that in many other arthropods. For example, many millipedes are toxic. I told you that they are protecting themselves by the cyanide products, right? So they are very toxic. That's why they are very brightly colored, black and yellow. But many species, these are three different species which are not really related, have the same coloration. So all of them are toxic, but all of them use the same warning coloration. So what is actually the advantage of that, right? The logic is that if I have toxic species and all of them look similar, it's enough for the bird to learn one of them to once try and have the problems to be vomiting after trying to eat something like that. And then I will avoid automatically all the others, right? So it's kind of more effective for protection if I look like the other toxic things. Another example, so this is already not another case, so this is where we finished the mimicry. How some Another example how some cool, nice structure, morphology, some shape, some weird shape can happen is that it also has some new structure. Again, it's the interaction. So interaction here is the defense against the predators. There was a nice study published a few years ago about these long projections of the Saturnid moths. Yeah, so Saturnid moths are very large night animals, which are always have this kind of long projection at the end of their wings. So it was long kind of confusing why they have them, right? Because it's also kind of not good for flying. And this team, which published this paper, they made very many experiments with this butterfly, this moth, and the bats who are eating them, and they shown very nicely that actually this projection is somehow reflecting. So you probably know that the bats are also night animals. They are using some kind of ultrasound waves, the sonar, something like the sound waves. They scream. It's in the frequency which we cannot hear, but if you use some machine, you can actually record it and even recognize which species of bats is flying around you. They scream it and they can hear the reflection from some animals or trees or something. So that's how they can avoid to hit some wall or trees or something. But it also they can discover their prey. They can discover the moth or any other flying insect in this way and catch it, right? And the moths with this long projections at the on the wings can actually confuse the bats sonar. They reflect much more than normal wing of the butterfly. So they look like something weird, and the bats are avoiding it. What about this? Which group of insect is that? Have you seen an insect like this? It can be confusing, right? We haven't had any insect with kind of weird antenna like that. But actually, the head is here. So this antenna is fake. This eye is also fake. Yeah, so this is another example of the defense of against predators. So normally predators always fight and attack the head of the insect. But here, if the bird attacks here, this is the plant hopper. So this thing can actually jump and can escape, and naturally if it loses this projection, it can still very easily survive and have offspring, for example. And so you can watch this video, or maybe this will be seen here. It has also the behavior which actually they actually move backwards to look like, to kind of multiply this effect that this is looking like a head, even though the head is actually here. And so it's actually really cool. Okay, another weird shapes and forms because of interactions. We already go very quickly. So these things on the example are different beetles which are living with termites. And yeah, termites and ants actually. It's beetles. Okay, these are beetles. This is beetle. This is beetle. This is beetle, and these are flies. You can see that, for example, for the fly, you would not even say that this is a fly, right? So, but they look like that because they interact with termites in this case, and they live in their nests. And to be able to do it, you have to kind of adapt in shape and also the cuticle surface structures and so on to look like a termite. So many things which live together with another insect, another social insect, with ants, with bees, with termites, they develop some super crazy shapes to kind of be protected or live, be able to survive in the nest. Another thing is that you can be living in a very unusual environment, right? So one of the very unusual environment can be cave. Cave beetles are usually looking very weird, even though they are actually quite closely related to a normal beetles living on the ground. So here you have an example, this beetle, which is the cave beetle, which you can find in Europe. It's this one, the long leg one. Its closest relative living outside of cave is actually looking this way, right? So, and if you would find some other cave beetles of totally different group, they would actually tend to look a little bit similar like this one. So they somehow, once you are living in a cave, the long legs and slender body is probably somehow something which is good for your life. And once we are already in caves, this is a paper published a few years ago, which is showing that living in a very weird, unusual environment also can mean that the lifestyle totally turns out. I purposely selected this case because it's extremely bizarre, but it's very nicely illustrating that unusual place for living can change the biology into something super crazy, right? So these are the bark louses. Yeah, this is the thing which normally you can find in leaf litter, and this is this one group which is not really belonging to any of these big clades of insects. Normally they live in some leaf litter, in bird's nest. They can eat your insect collection or books if you have them at home and so on. But otherwise they are quite normal insect, right? In some Brazilian caves, very dry caves, they discovered a species which actually is living in an environment very poor for food because it's a very dry cave. There's not actually much to eat, right? And they develop very crazy strategy, something which we call sexual reversal. So basically, here normally we have seen in the sexual selection, in the sexual kind of fight, that it was always the males who somehow compete for the attention of the females, right? Here it's the opposite. So here the females compete for the males, and the males are the ones who are selecting the female partners. Why is that? So I told you that the reason why normally females are choosy is that females are investing much more energy in the offsprings, in the new generation, right? So they have to be choosy because they don't have that many trials to make new babies. Here, what happens is that actually males in this cave barclaycea Barclays are those who invest more. The reason is that actually the kind of resource for which the females are fighting and which are they are after is not only sex and having babies being fertilized, but the male semen, the male sperm actually represents the one of the only rich source of energy in this nutrient poor cave environment. So basically, the male, in fact, feeds the female. And that's why the male is, in this case, the one who actually invests much more because the male brings the nutrition for making the eggs and so on, right? So that's why they actually changed the roles. And it goes so far, I did not show the pictures here, but it goes so far that actually even the copulation organs changed. So the females actually evolved something like penis, and males evolved something like vagina. You can check the paper if you are interested. It's something really bizarre but really cool, showing that this kind of weird environment really can be the reason for very weird shapes and very weird forms and very weird lifestyle. Cool. Okay, so this is it. Thanks for watching. And if you have any question, you can ask me at any moment during the normal class. Bye bye.